Okay, well, I had to make a video on this as someone who has made a ton of Derek Carr content over the years. Longtime fans of this channel know that very early on in this channel, for whatever reason, Raiders fans really, those videos always did well. And I was probably because I was kind of more pro on them than other people were, and I was more of a pro Derek Carr guy than a lot of other people were. So I figured I had to make a video on this. It's coming out late. This actually happened the morning of my wedding was when Derek Carr retired. So finally had time to get back and make a video on it. But yeah, Derek Carr has retired from the NFL, and there's a lot of things to talk about. The cap situation with the Saints, just his career as a whole. And let's actually sort of eulogize the playing career of Derek Carr before we get into the cap situation and what this means for the Saints moving forward. Derek Carr played in 3 different cities. Started off in Oakland, then moved to Las Vegas, and then finally played his last couple of years in New Orleans before retiring. And was someone who, was for a second-round pick, was surprisingly at the beginning of his career very good. Things went a lot better than maybe you were expecting right away. Kind of just came in the first year. Wasn't expected to do a lot. Showed enough to play another year, and then actually looked pretty good in his second year. Had 32 touchdowns to 13 interceptions. His third year, 2016, that was the year that you just can't help but think about what if. And I'm sure that he, as he's retiring, is still wondering what would have happened had he not had that leg injury in 2016. The Raiders, with him, went 12-3 that season. They probably would have ended up, and I believe that one of those, if I remember correctly, they lost the game that he got injured in, and that's included. They probably would have ended up with a bye week had he stayed healthy. Therefore, they would have possibly had a favorable matchup. They might have been able to make a conference championship game. Who knows what happens in that situation? Maybe they go on a run. Maybe they win the Super Bowl. We will never know. But that was definitely Carr's biggest moment, right? That was the year that we all thought Carr was going to be a spectacular quarterback, and it just kind of didn't happen that way. The next year was really, next couple years were disasters. He was, his record in the following 2 years was 6-9 and then 4-12. This is where a lot of Carr criticism came in, but to me, I never really felt like it was his fault. I thought that, he was maybe never quite as good as the 2016 version of himself. A lot of it really was that there were some awful defenses that he was playing with those years. And ultimately, again, there were some things he could have done to maybe make things better. He did sort of have a knack at this point in his career for finding ways to win games that they didn't think they were going to win, but ultimately, they really struggled and weren't able to have a 500 record until 2021, the second to last year of his Raiders tenure. This is the second year in Las Vegas. This was the year where John Gruden famously got ousted with the email scandal. Rich Bisaccia came in, and they should have kept him as the head coach, but things went actually pretty well. They made the playoffs and played the Cincinnati Bengals very tough in that playoff run, although, they got into the red zone. Ultimately, Carr tries to make a play, ends up throwing an interception on 4th down, but ultimately a solid season, and unfortunately, that was kind of the last time we would really see something quite like that. There was the one Josh McDaniels year in 2022 where, things didn't go great for the Raiders as a whole. This was not Carr's best year either. Ultimately, McDaniels decides to move off of Carr. Carr kind of famously decides to not not agree to the trade to the Saints, and instead forces the Raiders to cut him, so that way the Saints didn't have to give up value. So his new team doesn't have to give up value. Kind of a smart play there. And I feel people forget 2023. Carr was not horrible. He started slow, and I think people kind of wrote the Saints off. But they had they really got hot towards the end of the year. They ended up finishing 9-8. They tied with Tampa Bay in that year, but Tampa Bay had the tiebreaker, so ultimately they missed out in the playoffs just with that. But Carr was not horrible that last year, and a lot of people thought that once Carr got off to the hot start in 2024, okay, picking up where he left off, things are going to go well for the Saints. Of course, things then went horrible for the Saints. They, started losing. He still ended up with a 5-5 record in his starts, but had a lot of injuries, and injuries has kind of been the story of his career, unfortunately. especially in his Saints tenure. It seemed like he struggled to stay healthy. He has another injury that pops up this offseason. Wasn't sure how much he was going to play this year, and ultimately he decides to just call it. It was going to be 34 this next year. I guess still is going to be 34 this next year. Just because he retired doesn't mean you stop aging. So we'll be 34, so it's not that much of an early retirement, but a little bit early. But ultimately, with the injuries, he's made his money and maybe doesn't feel like the Saints are going to go too well. There was also reports he liked a lot of the coaching staff the Saints had and wasn't thrilled about those changes, but who knows? Reports are reports. Who knows how true that is? But ultimately, that is the playing career of Derek Carr. Very, very fascinating one. You could argue ultimately an underwhelming one after 2016, and I think that's probably fair, but there were some bright moments throughout here. Unfortunately, only one playoff game, which resulted in a loss, which feels surprising. Feels like it should have been more than just the one playoff game. Granted, his team made the playoffs twice, but he was injured for one of those, and also missed on a tiebreaker another season. But still, that is kind of the playing career of Derek Carr. As for the Saints, because this is another thing people have brought up, the Saints obviously very much in cap hell, and listen, they can finagle that, right? Let's not forget, they signed Derek Carr when they were in cap hell, so, they can make these things work. But with this, the way this has worked, and Carr has elected to, they kind of worked out a deal where Carr is getting, to keep some of the money, that, $10 million roster bonus he was already paid, but he's also not going to be getting his salary. Again, if you retire, you don't get your contract. Sometimes teams will just say, like, for example, when Drew Brees retired, the Saints still just gave Drew Brees his contract because it's Drew Brees, right? But here, that won't be happening. However, they have still paid Derek Carr some money, which Carr will then keep, just given the way the contracts has been structured, essentially. So for the next season, Carr is going to have about a $14 million cap hit, and for the following season, Carr will have about a $35 million cap hit, meaning the Saints for 2026 are currently only about $20 million over the salary cap, which by their standards is like remarkable, right? So you have that situation going. Now they will have to kick the can down the road a little bit because they don't really have contracts they can just get out of. Pretty much all of their contracts have like no savings attached to them. So that's the situation, but they're at least in a better spot than they've been in previous years. This helps them there, but they're the Saints that are going to continue to restructure, and they're going to continue to work over the cap. I would assume that's kind of how they operate. So, that's the situation. But ultimately, a very fascinating thing to happen with Derek Carr, a quarterback that, I had a lot of fun talking about over the years. I think there were some very fun games, and even when he joined the Saints, my, arch nemesis as a Tampa Bay fan, not arch nemesis, but a division rival of my favorite team, it's still disappointing that he wasn't really able to reach his full potential, and it kind of just felt like he's a player that I don't know what his full potential was, but it felt like he just never was able to reach it for whatever reason, whether it be injuries or what team he played or all of that stuff, which is little it's disappointing, but he still was a fun quarterback to talk about over the years. So ultimately those are my thoughts on Derek Carr, on the contract situation itself, and on the Saints and how they can move forward with all of this. But that's what I think. What do you think? Let me know in the comments below. Always love hearing from you. And of course, as always, thanks for watching.